Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Fulton County Library System's Adult Book Break. My name is Bonita, branch manager of the West End Public Library. Today, we are reading All the Water in the World by Raney. I chose this book because I think it's a great beach read, and now I'll read you a bit of summary on the book and something about the author. Maddie is 16, smart, funny, and profound. She has loyal friends, a mother with whom she's unusually close, a father she's never met, devoted grandparents, and a crush on a boy named Jack. Maddie also has cancer. Living in the shadow of uncertainty, she is forced to grow up fast. All the Water in the World is a story of a family doing its best when faced with the worst. Told in alternating voices of Maddie and her mother, Eve, the narrative moved between the family's lake house in Pennsylvania, their home in Washington, D.C., and London, where Maddie's father, Antonio, lives. Hungry for experience, Maddie seeks out her first romantic relationship and also finds solace in music and art, gets involved in the battle against climate change, and tracks down her father. She continually tests the depths and the limits of her closeness with her mother. While Eve has come to terms with the daughter that she only partly knows in a world she can't control. Now, Raney, the author of this book, she recently gained an MA in creative writing from Goldsmith University of London with a distinction and was awarded the 2017 Pat Kavanaugh Prize for All the Water in the World when the novel was still a work in progress. Born in Schenectady, New York, Raney attended Oberlin College, graduated from Duke University, and worked as a nurse before moving to London to study art. She now lives in London and teaches at the University of East London. Now I've chosen a chapter that I'd like to read today. This chapter will talk about Maddie and the relationship with her grandparents. But first, I need my glasses. As usual, Grandpa was driving. I got in and slammed the door, calling goodbye to my mother, who was waving from the porch in a way that meant she regretted leaving me to face God on my own. Grandpa gave me that almost smile that his face settles into when he isn't trying to make me do anything special. I used to ask, "Grandpa, why are you smiling?" He always replied, "I'm not." It became a joke between us. Now I see it as an expression of a good-natured person who wants to be obliging while keeping himself to himself. When I was small and we went to their old church, Grandma wore flowered skirts and high heels. Since then, colored blouse. Her necklace looked like silver finger bones. She kissed the air in my direction. "Hello, sweetie. Nice hat. Look, we match," I said, getting in. My knitted beret with the brim happened to be the exact shade of Grandma's blouse. I leaned on my fist and watched the fire station go by and the public library, where I borrowed books a million years ago, and the lavender house with the yellow trim, next door to the orange house with the white trim. That's Tacoma Park for you, the most original neighborhood this side of the Beltway. I always wondered who lived in those two houses and what they were like. Maybe I would knock on their door someday without a hat on and see what happened. What is it with men in their cars? Women are at least good drivers, but if there's a man around, he gets the keys, and she's the one who double checks the traffic at the intersections. Grandma didn't seem to mind. She had her own half smile, completely different from Grandpa's. Hers said, "Deep down, the world is good, and I want to be part of the goodness." She was humming. Maybe she was happy it was Palm Sunday, or maybe she was happy to have me in the car. After all, I am her only granddaughter, and I was named after her, Madeline Rose. "Grandma," I said, sitting up, "do you mind if I call you Rose?" Smiling, she twisted around, her rimless glasses winking. "If you like." The thing about my grandmother is she generally finds me entertaining. What brought that up? Oh, I said airily, I'm not a baby anymore. That's for sure. Besides, it's my middle name. I should be able to use it. Agreed, she said, turning back. What about me? Grandpa demanded, catching my eye in the narrow mirror. You already call her Rose. Very funny. You can still be Grandpa, if that's what you mean, as long as I'm not missing out on anything. Don't worry, I said, and patted his shoulder over the seat. It's a girl thing, isn't it, Rose? Absolutely. Oh, look, Maddie, a deer. 2 of them. Their big, unlikely bodies looked across the median strip and plunged into the woods on the other side. Whoa, said Grandpa. They cause a lot of accidents, you know. Can you imagine wanting to shoot them, said Grandma. I'll never understand wanting to shoot a beautiful animal. What if you're starving? I asked. Well, that's different. Cars were backed up near the metro station, and we didn't move for ages. The first chance he had, Grandpa came off the highway. I need another coffee. If it's one thing I hate, it's sitting in traffic. Hashtag first world problems, I said. What? Never mind. He pulled up to the curb a few blocks later and got out and leaned into my window, speaking behind his hand in a stage whisper. Your grandmother makes terrible coffee. It'll rot your socks. Why don't you make it yourself? He pulled a face and pretended to take off my nose. I watched him stride toward that coffee place, hands in his pocket, whistling. The hair on the top of his head looked as though it could easily blow off. It gave me a queasy feeling, seeing him from front to back. I trained my eyes instead on the dim sum restaurant on the corner, where Mom and I like to go for Sunday brunch. The line was already down the sidewalk and around the block. I counted the people so as not to think about the back of my grandfather's head or my grandmother humming in the front seat, fingering the strap of her purse, loving beautiful animals. It should be a law of nature that all family members disappear at the exact same time. Then no one would be left behind. I had counted up to 26, almost to the corner, when one person pulled apart into 2. They had been kissing. Robin had his arm across Mom's shoulders. What a surprise! How funny to see them there. Her neck was bent, her shoulders shaking. As her head came up, I saw that she was laughing, not crying. Go and have a day out with your grandparents. I have work to do. Unfortunately, that wistful wave from the porch. My mom was holding on to his outstretched arm with both hands, not in the least bit worried about the weight. They had sneaked off the minute I was gone. They'd have the whole morning and part of the afternoon to themselves. A generous person would not begrudge them for that. A generous person would be grateful that her mother had someone, whereas a person who had been unfairly singled out by the universe might think a hole had opened up into the future where everyone was going about their business. Might even be willing to be Robert's good-natured self to go away and leave my mother to me, who had her first, who belonged to her completely, who needed her more. My grandfather folded himself behind the wheel, chuckling about something or other. He'd insulted her coffee, but still, Grandma was laughing and holding onto his cup aloft to prevent the spillage, while behind their backs, I could barely see my own hands, let alone down the road or the cars, as we swung into the traffic, church bound. Now that's what I call a church, Rose. When I pointed to the steeple gray stone on the corner, my grandfather's arm came along with mine. We had been joined together for the walk down 10th Street because she's always linking arms, rubbing your back, resting her hand on your shoulder while she's talking to you. When I got sick, she started doing it nonstop. According to Mom, this comes from losing her own mother when she was 10. I think that she likes to touch. No, that's Catholic. Ours is over there, said Grandma serenely. First Congregational. We were looking at each other with a box of blue glass floating on a concrete pedestal. The square panes formed a blade at the corner, and the clouds captured on their surface collided with the real clouds at odd angles. Wow, I said, very modern, Rose. The building gave off a violet shimmer that made me feel observed, like sunglasses where the person can see your eyes, but you can't see theirs. The church is on the 2 lower floors, said Grandma. The upper part is the offices we rent out. You rent them out? The church rents them out. That's how it survives in this day and age. We built the building with that in mind. You built the building? She gave me one of her looks. So, I said, the church is concrete and the offices are colored glass? Isn't that the wrong way around? She gave me one of her looks. So, I said, the church is concrete and the offices are colored glass? Isn't it the wrong way around? You're a quick study, she smiled. Always were. We used to look more Gothic, Grandpa put in. He was ambling along, unattached on my other side. The first church we had a bell tower. When was that? 1868. So, you never actually saw it. Ha! I'm not that ancient. We're on our 3rd building now. Goes back to the Civil War. Services were once held in the Capitol. Why was that? I like to feed my grandfather questions. He's in love with information. Grandma is happy as long as she's holding on to your arm. Grandpa is happy as long as he's gifting you with facts or digging up new ones. The first minister was chaplain of the House of Representatives. And did you know the church built schools for freed slaves? Once we were inside, I made a belt line for the women's room, splashed water on my face, and rubbed my concealer stick everywhere I could think of. Red around the eyes, gray under them. Do church people scare easily? I touched both birds in the earrings Mom gave me for my birthday. They sat on a silver branch, running across the hoop. The tiny birds gave me courage. You look fine, said the person in my head. You will be fine. Lo and behold, I was fine, able to enter the jaunty indifference with a room full of strangers. I worked my way back to the adults, the little kids, a few teenagers milling about. A lady handed me a program and a stock of some sort. Oh, there you are, Maddie, called Grandma, sounding anxious. I see everyone got their palm branch. Frond, said Grandpa. Frond, I stand corrected. I rolled my eyes. Grandpa grinned and poked me in the arm. I elbowed him away. They're ethnically sourced, said Grandma, taking my arm and tucking it in her side. After a minute, I pulled away, pretending to search for something in my bag. I wasn't going to tell her about Mom and Robin at the dim sum. There were plenty of other things for me to be crying about. I followed them down the aisle of the sanctuary that was just as plain as the lobby. The blandness of the door surprised me. Was there such a thing as taking humility too far? No carpet, no stained glass, completely lacking in color, except for a sea and sky quilt hanging behind the stage, where a piano and music stands were set up. In places of pews, there were chairs, plus a set of polished wooden bleachers along one wall. My grandparents made straight for the second tier of the bleachers. People had left them a space and were turning to greet them. Grandma glanced at me from time to time, on the verge of making introductions, but I lowered my head to the program. The picture on the cover was reproduced from some tapestry. Oh wow, the crowd, even and the donkey and wearing some same worried look you see on newborn babies. Wasn't this supposed to be a joyful day? The triumphant day? Couldn't someone come up with a cheerful picture for the occasion? There was no shortage of cheerful people on the premises, in spite of their varying states of health. I counted 2 wheelchairs, a number of canes, and 5 people with hearing aids. One was a small girl with sunken eyes and a peanut-shaped head. She was laughing, doing cartwheels in the aisle until her dad told her to stop. Maybe everyone has something wrong with them, even if it is invisible. Maybe that's why we were here. Sound of the bell. All glory, land, and honor, responding and sending. I stood up and sat down when Grandma did and watched the ministers at their lecterns. A bearded man with a woman with close cropped hair. They had on black floor-length robes draped with purple satin. Kind of weird in an up-to-the-minute place like this that built schools for freed slaves. People must still want the ministers to look special, even if they make a point of putting their lecterns on the same level as the chairs. Or what else would make a church? Not just a bunch of people in the room. The call to worship gave way to silent prayer. Heads were lowered. Meek voices filled the room. I closed my eyes and tried to clear a special place in my mind. Sneaker looked down. Nail polish coming off. Sneaker looked sideways. Grandpa's brows were raised behind his glasses, while Grandma's were bunched in concentration. I did not want to see them like that. Sneaker looked at the program. No matter where you are on life's journey, you are welcome. Tough and tender days ahead. Don't forget to validate your parking ticket. My mother and I were prone to attacks of hilarity on the most earnest of occasions. I missed her. I needed her now. She could go to brunch with Robin whenever she liked. I closed my eyes and opened them again. The prayer was over. People were coughing. The offering plate was circulated by a boy in a baseball cap. While up on stage, 3 musicians dressed in black took their seats. I was close enough to see the musicians preparing their instruments. The pianist pumped his pedals. The clarinet player rotated his barrel and blew on the holes. The cellist drew on her bow through a clock and laid the clock on the floor. She prodded her strings, fiddled with some keys, and brought her hand to rest on the shape of the wood. By some freaky coincidence, it was Robin's C major trio? No, selections from the first and third movements of the A minor. All was ready. Tuning up had finished. The ministers had withdrawn to the chairs in the front now, the black tails of their robes sticking out. Fingers were poised. The bow hand was arched at the far end of the bow. They began calmly enough. The cellist had a sweet idea. The piano, the clarinet considered it and gave it back. Before long, they were playing with their whole bodies. The pianist hunched over, pulling his fingers reluctantly off the keys. Comically, the clarinetist puffed out his cheeks. As the music zigzagged upward, one of his hands tried to fly off the conduct. I leaned forward, afraid for him, but no. He wiped the hand on his leg and just replaced it at the same time. The room swelled with music. The melody swirled and pranced, passing between the instruments, picking things up. As the section drew to a close, settling them down. They began again, quick and sharp. The pianist was in a whirl of his own, but the other two exchanged meaningful looks. Soon the cellist and her bow was in a frenzy, her black hair swinging side to side, beating out of time. Not gently, the cellist's work was gripped. The strings were pinned down by dramatic vibration of her curved fingers. The melody loosened and tightened, climbed up and up, turned back onto itself. The clarinetist had held for a long, simultaneous passage. He was following it around to see where it would go, arching his back to make his body more available to the music, almost lifting off the chair. At the last minute, he descended. The pianist finished with a stroke of chords that made his hands pop off the keys. People exhaled and shifted their feet. No applause, no whistling, no standing ovation. To go through all of that and get so little in return, I longed to rush up to the musicians and to confess to something. The minister stepped to the lectern and said, "Thank you on behalf of everyone, and thank you to the director who made this possible." and the musicians tramped down the steps back onto the stage. I sat in light-headed silence. Had I ever really listened to music before? My grandmother gave me that everyday smile, covered my hands with hers, and mouthed, "Weren't they good?" My grandfather had removed his glasses and was peering at the program music. It had never been his thing. Oh well, I was alone with it. I did not mind. I did not feel alone. I felt the opposite of alone. The rest of the service passed me by, the final hymn. I didn't even attempt to sing. I was thinking about my mother and Robin kissing at the dim sum. That miserable girl in the car seemed like someone I used to know, who I felt sorry for, but no longer agreed with. I thought about the keys and the turning pegs and the strings and the tender, practical way the musicians treated their instruments, kind of like a second body. As the minister delivered the benediction, head down, one arm stretched out, I thought about the concentration of musicians when they played. It was not like what happened during the silent prayer. They were practicing with a different form of privacy. This is completely personal, they seemed to say, but we're all in this together. We urgently need to tell you something. We're going to keep telling you and trying to convince you that all of these sad, hopeful things we're saying are even true, as though you won't understand it any more than we do. Right in front of us, her father's arms, was the cartwheel girl. She stared at me with her small, strange eyes. "Hey," she said, yelling as if calling me from a great distance, "what happened to you?" My grandmother took my elbow from behind me to steer me away, but I was smiling at that girl, my first real smile of the day. Let everyone look at me, pretend or not. It didn't matter. It didn't matter in the least. Back at home, I found my mother curled up on the sofa, reaching her head, tipped down so cords of her neck were exposed. She looked at me with peaceful eyes. "That's what a Sunday away from your sick kid will do for you." I laid on my legs across her lap, wiggled my stocking feet to get her to massage them, and then told her church had been awesome. What was so awesome about it? Everything. Everything? The music was out of this world. Epic. She smiled, kneading my head in her hand. What made me happy made her happy, even if we went against her own principles. "Arches," I said, absentmindedly she obliged. "Ankles?" I barked when she made me think of it and returned to her book. The pressure of her hands gave me the feeling that, for the moment at least, everything was all right. Everything was being held in place. It would have been a great unburdening to cry. For my tantrum on the way to church, for Brahms and the three musicians, for my mother's strong grip and the pleasure passing through me as if my body were as good as anyone else's. Instead, I closed my eyes and vowed to the universe that I would be the kind of person who wished everyone well at all times, especially my mother, who didn't deserve any of this. When Robin wandered in, I told him it had been the A minor trio. "I know the one," he said, seating himself at a well-judged distance away from the two of us. "An unusual piece, clarinet and cello. They say it sounds like the instruments are in love with one another." "Well, I loved it." "Will you go again?" Mom wanted to know. "Oh, yes. I'll probably be born again." "Not in that church you won't." "Oh, yeah? What if I'm planning to?" "It's not that kind of place. I bet your grandparents were pleased to have you there." "Thrilled," I said. "Ecstatic. I'd like to hear more Brahms." "I've got the CD," said Robin. Hashtag, just say the word. "Actually," I told him, "I want to hear it live." After that, I went to church from time to time to confuse my mother and to make my grandmother happy. I used to get the congregation and they got used to me, though I never liked the prayers. I closed my eyes and roamed around in my thoughts until the musical performance began. At home, Robin and I organized our own concert series for the good works between treatments. My requirement was that We had to be able to see the musicians up close. This ruled out the Kennedy Center and other big concert halls whose front row seats were beyond our budget. Instead, we opted for chamber music at museums and libraries. We heard Beethoven at the Phillips Collection, the 15th century French at the Shakespeare Library, and the Krieger Museum, it was a mausoleum, and at the Renwick, Haydn's quarters. Sometimes it was just Robin and me. Sometimes the three of us went. Robin sat back with his arms folded, wearing his proud look. If my mother came along, she scanned the room as if she knew anyone. From time to time, she squeezed my knee and whispered, "Isn't this fun?" What they didn't know was I came for the solitude. I always sat forward to see the musicians take care of their instruments before they played. When they were about to start, I seized by the longing to be alone. It was like getting to the best part of a good book. I wanted to be with them, with no one in my line of sight. The others had to be present, but at a certain point, I made them drop away until in the middle of the room, packed with people, I might as well have been sitting there completely on my own, waiting for the music to be part of the company, with the instruments as well. Wing it, out of the way from time to time. Even that was out of reach. So the next chapter is about Eve, but I want you to take this book home for yourself and read it. As I said, it's a great beach read. The chapters weave in and out with the characters of Maddie, her mother Eve, her mother's boyfriend Robin, and then Antonio, Maddie's father, who eventually comes into the picture and the adventures begin. And throughout the book, you'll hear about Maddie's cancer and her treatment and how she weaves about life, how she goes about learning to live with her illness and being able to be just the person, the normal 16-year-old teenager that you would think about. You can also find this on Beanstack. Check out your public library. Look for it in the collection, look for it in our digital resources, but again, All the Water in the World is a great beach read, and Raney is the author. Thank you again for tuning into Adult Book Break at Atlanta Public Library. I look forward to talking with you soon and seeing you again. Have a great evening, everyone. Goodbye.